Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Hullhouse. I bet you and I have something in common, and that's that we both have a great distrust of the medical industrial complex. So I'm doing two things with that distrust. A, I'm trying to find all the lies I've been fed, all the bought off scientific studies to see through them. But I'm also trying to find the real truth, find out how to actually heal the human body. So if my child is sick, I can give her some elderberry or some clove oil in the ear for an earache or whatever it is without turning to some concoction, some sort of petroleum based concoction that's probably going to end up killing me in the long run. And so, my guest today, Dr. Joel Brind, has a fascinating story of how he discovered the powerful, effect of this simple amino acid called glycine. And how this glycine affects inflammation, but actually, it's kind of an underlying thing of almost all illnesses and discomforts are rooted in inflammation. So if you can figure out inflammation at the core, you can actually affect the trajectory of your overall health in your life. So anyway, folks, you're going to really be fascinated with this interview because it is not a typical discussion that you're going to hear from a doctor who's just going to say, oh, here's this pharmaceutical and here's this pharmaceutical. This is the opposite of that, of like, hey, how can we use whole foods and natural things to heal ourselves and prevent us from walking into that hospital and just saying, hey, just plug whatever you want into me and shoot me full of any new drug you've got. I'll be happy. Let's try to avoid that. So, folks, please enjoy the interview. Joel, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot.
So, especially post COVID pandemic and all this nonsense that the whole world's dealt with the past couple of years, I find that myself and a lot of the audience that's watching this show has developed this massive distrust for the medical industrial complex, which I don't think is a bad thing. Actually, I think it's similar to saying, you know what? I don't quite trust the government the way that I used to. I think it's probably a good thing these days. And
Right.
so part of what my mission is trying to understand what the falsehoods of that medical system are that we've been lied to about for so long, and also what the truths are. And so through interviews with people like yourself, I feel like that we get closer to understanding how the body works, why we get ill, how to treat illness, how to be more healthy, how to be taking less pharmaceutical drugs or no pharmaceutical drugs, etc. And I was on a call with you recently discussing a lot of your background. And I thought, this is just such an interesting and important discussion that, as I remember telling you, it's like, gosh, Joel, if we would have recorded our call and just put it up, people would have
Yes.
loved it. And so here we are. So how about we start with, if you want to give just a quick background of yourself, and then we'll dive into the discussion together.
Okay. Well, I'm a pretty mainstream trained basic medical scientist. I actually have a degree in basic medical science with majors in biochemistry and minor in physiology and immunology. And so what we're going to talk about is largely the confluence of the areas of specialization of my very mainstream training. I got my BS at Yale in 1971 and my basic medical science PhD in 1981 from NYU. And I just never lost my idealism in the sense of, going for the truth no matter what. And unfortunately, many fall by the wayside because other things assume priority. Things like money and publication, and all of that. And then what you were talking about a minute ago really is finding that fine line between skepticism and cynicism. And skepticism is very healthy; cynicism is not. And so one should always. President Reagan said it best, right? Trust but verify. So that's where we are. I say you can always trust everybody to act according to his nature and his loyalty, and always pay very close attention to discern what those are, and then you'll be on the right path in terms of trusting what other people say. As for me, it's kind of easy in an area like this because this is my wheelhouse. So I have a lot of basic knowledge that I can fall back on and say, well, no, that's non-scientific or whatever it is. And so many in so many ways, the defenders of quote science are not scientific. And if so, for example, a cardiologist said to me, in my explaining the role of glycine, which we'll get into about how fundamental it is to so many conditions where health is compromised by one sort of disease or another, he said, "Oh, it can't be that simple, just one compound." And that's very unscientific. Science is about the simple. You don't reject hypotheses because they're too simple. You reject them because they're too complicated. Otherwise, we'd still believe that the planets and the sun revolved in complex epicycles around the Earth. So, we have to. So that's a good grounding in science is very important. And many scientists actually lack that. They think it's all about the data. The data is the end of the line. So it's about it more than anything else. It's about asking the right questions and then observing not just particular phenomena, but just observing what's going on among scientists and how they describe things and think about things and talk about things. And what my discovery here fundamentally comes down to is the fact that things get covered up with words, intentionally or unintentionally. These days with the COVID business, of course, we see a lot of it's intentional, but just unintentionally. Now, glycine, which we'll talk about, is very simple. The simplest of all the amino acids is believed to be non-essential. So if you think that something's non-essential, who's going to spend money or give somebody a grant to spend money to research it because, well, it's non-essential? And I think with the pandemic, everybody found out for the first time out there at large just how the word non-essential is toxic. What you do for a living is non-essential. You're done, right? You're out of business. So that's really what happened here, is that we have a very unfortunate situation where there is a very common substance, an abundant, common, and necessary nutrient, which, because the body can make it from simpler components, has been deemed by the nutritional, keepers of whoever names things, that's often very nebulous, as something that's non-essential. That's how it's come down through us. And so when knowledge, in the sciences, you have this prevailing dogma, that's sort of, facts, discoveries, understanding of bodily systems and chemical systems and so on. They get handed down, and everything that's added is added on top of what's there. And if what's there has a fundamental mistake in it, then it tends to get very deeper and deeper and deeper. So now what we have is a situation where the population is not very healthy, right? People are sort of okay till they're about 40, and then by the time they're 80, if they're lucky, they've been hobbling through it with, artificial knees and all kinds of medications, surgeries, and they're sort of and not very healthy for a long time. They may be subject ultimately to a high blood pressure, pre-diabetes, diabetes. In fact, even from the very start, from before you're born, from things like autism, and at the very end, things like Alzheimer's disease. Then there's all manner of heart disease, heart attacks, strokes, cancer of all kinds. Wouldn't it be very interesting if all of these things had one simple cause? Well, the funny thing is, medical science now understands that it is basically one cause, one bodily process, which is inflammation. They're blaming everything on inflammation now. And actually, they're 100% right. What they are wrong about is what inflammation is and what it's for. So they're not, so they keep, as I say, building things on top of what was before. And if that's erroneous, then you've got a fundamental flaw, which is going to make real understanding impossible. So we have inflammation, which is the first response of the immune system. Your immune system is there to protect you from disease. And the first response, the response to some new microbe that your immune system has never seen before, is basically inflammation. That is, it's a non-specific response. Your immune cells are secreting poisons to try and kill whatever got in before it kills you, but it takes weeks before they can make specific antibodies, chemical targets that can specifically go to the specific microbe that's invaded. So uh, the first response is non-specific. That's inflammation, and the cells that cause it are called macrophages, which means big eaters from the Greek. But the macrophages there are some that circulate in the blood. There are those that are resident in virtually every organ and tissue of the body. It's their job to go after whatever's gotten into you and kill it first. The trouble is that we are all used to seeing inflammation as a natural response, not only to infection, but also to injury. So you sprain your ankle, it gets inflamed, right? It's swollen, and painful and immobilized, and we all know inflammation. You get a sunburn, and then for the next couple of days, even though you're out of the sun, you get this painful, burning of your skin, and it's painful to get washed and dressed and undressed and all those things. So all of that is inflammation, and we assume, because it always happens to everybody pretty much, that's just the body's normal reaction. Now, here's an interesting question for you. When you get an injury like that, some sort of blunt injury on the playing field or whatever, what's the first thing you do? Put ice on it. Why do you put ice on it? To stop inflammation. Well, that's funny. Why is your body doing exactly the wrong thing in response to injury? It shouldn't do that. Your body is brilliant. It should do the right thing.
Well, I'll say something quickly too, because I used to, growing up, think that a fever was a really bad thing. Like, oh, he's got a fever, right? Get rid of the
Right.
fever. Whereas now, if my daughter has a fever, I say, okay, write it out. Your body is using this fever to heal itself. And I look at now as fever as a good thing. And I don't want to go get some over the counter medicine to make the fever go away so that whatever was supposed to be killed off by the fever is
Yep.
still there. And I think the same applies to an injury. Why is it that if I sprain my
Yes. So
ankle, I rush to put ice on it? Where it's like, well, wouldn't my body respond appropriately to that? Right? Like, why do I need to add
well,
ice to it?
right. Well, the answer is your body's not responding appropriately, actually. And there's a lot of people have the hypothesis that what's happening is that your body is immobilizing the joint so that it can't bend to prevent further injury. There's that kind of theory. But what I've discovered, this was actually not the first aspect of it that I discovered about glycine and inflammation. What I discovered is that this isn't so, because it actually doesn't happen unless you are deficient in this one simple nutrient. It just doesn't happen. So, for example, and these are my aha moments when I say discovery. I'm going back to basically 2010, and a couple of things happened. One was blunt injury, one was sunburn. So the sunburn one, and a New Yorker would appreciate this. I was at the new Yankee Stadium for the first time. Brother-in-law had scored tickets to a game, and I was all excited. I never wear a hat. Usually, don't wear a hat unless I'm actually playing ball. And so I had my short sleeve shirt and shorts, and here I was, very happy to be at the new Yankee Stadium, which, being a new stadium, had no obstructions. So we're out there in the sunshine, and it's around the 10th of June, very close to the solstice, not a cloud in the sky. And so I was really enjoying the game, and I think the Yanks were winning. And then around the fifth inning, I started to feel a little warm in my thighs, and I looked down and saw where the hemline of my shorts and the sleeves of my shirt and my neck and everything was really, really bright red boiled lobster color. And I hadn't done this to myself in probably 40 years. And I knew with 100% certainty that I would be in pain, really severe pain, doing things like getting dressed, undressed, bathing for the next couple of days. Well, first thing I did, of course, is I went into the shade. All that happened at that point was my skin was red. And then what happened is it just started to fade away. It never happened. So that was one of two aha things that occurred to me, that I realized that inflammation that I fully expected with 100% certainty was going to happen didn't happen. And it didn't happen because I was in the middle of a self-experiment with this amino acid glycine, which I had put myself on 10 grams a day as an experiment back in 2008, because I knew that it was safe, and through my understanding of biochemistry, it should have some benefit. I wasn't exactly sure what it was.
Folks, how do you feel? Me, I feel great. And one of the reasons I believe I feel better is because I take Balance of Nature's fruits and veggies in a capsule. They have an amazing story how this product was developed by Dr. Douglas Howard. It's right there on their website. Balance of Nature receives over 1,000 success stories every single month. They have hundreds of thousands of customers who've purchased billions of capsules of their fruits and veggies over the past 20 years. You should check it all out on their website. Their products are gluten free and non GMO, and they contain no added sugars or synthetics. I think if you're looking for something to make you feel better naturally, you should definitely give Balance of Nature a try. In fact, order today. Whether you order online or call them direct, you must use the promo code SETH, that's SETH, to get this special offer of 35% off plus $10 off any additional sets, plus free shipping and the money back guarantee. So call them at 800-2468-751 and use discount code SETH, or order online at balanceofnature.com and use discount code SETH to get 35% off.
So none of those things happened. And because I was also studying it in the literature, I was actually studying another amino acid called methionine, which is an essential amino acid, and which people get too much of. That's what led me to glycine, because other researchers had shown that glycine is an amino acid that's used to clear excess methionine. In fact, it takes at least 2 molecules of glycine to get rid of every excess molecule of methionine. So what's the modern diet? The modern diet is we're eating meat, fish, and poultry almost 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, right? You have your bacon and eggs for breakfast and a tuna fish sandwich for lunch and steak or chicken dinner, every day of the week pretty much. So that's lots and lots and lots of protein, animal protein. And what do we do with the bones? Well, unlike our forebears, we tend to throw the bones in the trash instead of the soup. So that's where all the glycine is. It's in the collagen, which is in the bones and the connective tissue. Meanwhile, we're eating more of the muscle meats, which are rich in methionine and poor in glycine. So we're not only getting less glycine, but we're actually leaching or depleting the body of glycine. So that's why, for example, vegans who eat less of all the amino acids than meat eaters have more glycine in their blood than meat eaters do, because of that imbalance of the amino acids. And it turns out that nothing is more important in regulating the first responders. It's like, if we go back to the first responder as by way of analogy to first responders in society. So you have, if you have an accident on the thruway, I can say thruway to a New Yorker, right? So I don't have to call it 87 or the freeway, but whatever it is. When you have an accident on the highway, who comes, right? The state troopers come around, and they call the ambulances, and they call the tow trucks, and take out accident reports, and they get out and they redirect traffic, so there's no further difficulty to try and get around the situation. And when finally the mess is cleaned up, the tow trucks, the ambulances, and all of that, the troopers get back in their cars and they go back to their base. Now, that's interesting because they're armed. You see them walking around with guns in their holsters. They're all loaded and ready to go, but they don't start shooting up the place, because that's not what they're there for. Their first job is to just clean up the mess, get everything flowing again. And that's what these macrophages do in the body. They're called the M2 state, where they basically just clean up the mess. They go around like amoebas, literally an amoeboid type movement, and they engulf foreign particles and damaged cells and dead cells, and just literally clean up the mess without being activated to the point of starting to make and secrete poisons. Like, for example, if you have a bottle of hydrogen peroxide, you read the small print, it says, do not take internally. Meanwhile, if you actually scrape your knee, you break the skin, or for that matter, blunt injury, if you're deficient in glycine, like most people are, your macrophages will be making hydrogen peroxide internally. Wait a minute. Isn't that going to damage normal tissue? Yes. That's what happens with chronic inflammation that ultimately leads to all these disease conditions. Because a condition where there has been cell damage or cell death, tissue damage, has attracted these macrophages and activated them. It's called priming them. They've now been primed to actually cause inflammation, to secrete various kinds of poisons. One is called TNF alpha, which, for example, causes migraine headaches. That's why if you give glycine, it can get rid of migraines, all kinds of things. But now, what about this business of injury, cell death, tissue injury? That happens all the time, of course, just from not just aggressive activities like sports, but also ordinary walking and talking and so on. You get little micro injuries happen all the time. But especially there are many physiological processes, normal processes which cause cell death. And that's part of what happens. So, for example, we know that ovarian cancer of the ovaries, is the incidence is proportional to how many times in a woman's life she has ovulated. Why is that? Well, ovulation is a very violent process, actually. From the surface of the ovary, an egg is exploded out as if from a volcano or a cannon. And it causes damage locally to the surface of the ovary. Now, if one is glycine deficient, like most people are, and you end up with inflammation there because of that injury, then right through that inflammation process, the body is trying to heal itself. And it can't, so it keeps trying to heal itself by growing. How does it grow? The cells multiply. How do they multiply? They have to keep copying the DNA. And the DNA being copied all the time in cell multiplication leads to mutations. And ultimately, if this kind of chronic inflammatory situation is there, you end up with cancer developing, or you may end up with cancer developing. The same thing happens in the arteries with a chronic inflammatory situation. So, for example, if you have a situation where you're a little bit overweight, let's say you have 10, 20, 30 pounds extra of abdominal fat, and then every time you try to squeeze into those clothes and tighten it, you irritate the fat and you kill some cells, and you're glycine deficient, you end up with pre-diabetes and then diabetes. Why? Because your immune system thinks you have a systemic infection because the glycine is not there. So how does the glycine work? Glycine is actually, although it is one of the amino acids that's a building block for proteins, and for that, it is non-essential. Your body can make all it needs to make protein. It also has another role as a free amino acid, a small molecule. It's almost like an electrolyte. Everybody would argue with me chemically. They say, oh, that's an organic chemical. I actually consider glycine to be inorganic because you can find it on asteroids and comets. It is so simple a molecule that it's actually made in the non-living world and was made billions of years before the living world started living. So this is a very fundamental compound that needs to be present in the body fluids in very high concentrations, a lot higher than you need just to make protein. And if you go to the normal levels, just to give you a few simple numbers, the normal levels, if you go to Quest Diagnostics and say, what is the normal amount of glycine in the blood? It says, 150 to 350 roughly micromolar. Well, actually, unless it's over 500, it's really not healthy because you're going to have inappropriate inflammation. Now, there's another example. If you just that's just going to what's normal. Oh, yes, normal levels of glycine. This is what it's said for the last 50 years. This is what every doctor relies on. And you come in, and if they measure my glycine, they'll find out it's about 6 or 700. And they'll say, your glycine is high. Like there's something unhealthy about it. Well, no, I know that that's actually a healthy level. And what they say is healthy for everybody is not, because they just don't know. We think somehow that we are in an age where everybody has this underlying assumption, this trust in, scientific and medical authorities, that somehow they know all about the body and how it works. Really, we know very little, but there's this arrogant, what I call the arrogance of modernity. Where just because, we're modern, we have MRIs and all kinds of fancy stuff that's so sophisticated and gives us 3D views on the inside and everything. We think we know all about it, but really, could we design a human body? I mean, look at all the disastrous rollouts of AI. I think Google should name its AI Geigo. Garbage in, garbage out. That ought to be that name, Geigo.
There you go. So I
Because
want
that's
to
all it is.
just make sure I understand
Yeah,
the fundamentals of this. So inflammation, let's just say that
right,
you sprain your knee, you have a sunburn, you have
right,
swollen glands, that the body swells, it gets red, it causes pain, right? So pain is a byproduct of that inflammation. I'm guessing it has to do probably with the cell poisoning and different things happening that you're
yes,
talking about.
yes,
So now a lot of people, we've been trained that, and this is what the medical system does in many ways, is it doesn't really fix things fundamentally. Oftentimes it just gives us different ways of dealing with pain. So like, oh, this
right,
hurts, and you take an
yes,
Aleve. Your back is sore, take an Aleve. Take a Bayer, or whatever it is. So we're used
right.
to saying, oh, that hurts, I should get rid of the pain, instead of looking, okay, why is that hurt happening, especially if it's prolonged. It's like, why is my ankle not healing? It's been a month since I sprained it, and I'm still feeling pain when I walk, and I'm still taking a leave every day, and it's not as effective anymore.
Right.
So if I understand correctly with what you're saying, and how glycine plays a role, and I want to hear more about the details of how it happens on a more of a cellular level, is that basically with low levels of glycine, because I think most people don't eat a lot of the bones and the organ meats of animals, which, as you've talked about, is one of the primary places to get glycine. A lot of people,
Right.
you're right, they
Bones are
go buy
connected.
a
Yeah.
T-bone steak and they grill it, they throw the bone away, right?
Right.
They get
Right.
a rotisserie chicken, they pull the meat off, throw the carcass away, instead of doing a 24-hour bone broth, which would then give you that glycine. So basically, when there's a problem in the body, say an injury, the without the amount of glycine needed, what the body does is it sends in these first responders, and they're trying to fix things, but they release a lot of poisons and toxins to try to correct things, which cause this
It's trying to
inflammation
kill things. Yeah.
and cause
An infection
pain.
that isn't there. Right.
Okay. And then if that happens over a prolonged period of time, that's how you have cancers or chronic illnesses, etc. Now, what role does glycine play in inflammation? Why is it that when you have X amount of glycine, this amino acid in your body, that why is it that your body is then dealing with inflammation or dealing with an injury in a very different way? Because it seems to me
Yes. Well,
like,
the,
go ahead.
going back to that first responders on the thruway analogy, right? The cops. It's like a trigger lock. It keeps the activation process from triggering. So the cell has a lot of triggers on it for different things, and it's actually an electrochemical switch. Like if you have two pole a wall switch, a light switch. If the switch is off, you have 120 volts between the two poles of the switch potential. If you close the switch, that is, you turn on the light, now you have abolished that voltage. Now it's a zero voltage between the poles of the switch, and the light is on. So in a cell, you have millivolt potentials, like the usual resting potentials around 70 millivolts. And when there is some kind of receptor that detects an infection, for example, there are receptors that will detect the coat protein or the coat chemical structure of a bacterium. So these macrophages can detect a bacterial infection, and that will trigger a depolarization. Now you'll have an influx of ions which will abolish the potential. So, for example, usually the big one is calcium. It's more calcium, which is a positive ion outside the cell than inside the cell. And if you open a channel that allows calcium to come in, calcium being positively charged will abolish the net negative charge on the inside of the cell, and the cell will get into full activation. What glycine does is it opens chloride channels. Chloride is a negative ion.
Hey, folks, I've got a quick message for you. So, I'm sure you've heard a lot of people, myself included, talking about the importance of buying precious metals, gold and silver. But what's really behind that? Is just a thing of, hey, buy this gold, buy this silver, right? Or is there something deeper that we should be looking at? So, I recently came across some figures about house prices. So, in 1930, the average family home was approximately $4,000. Fast forward to 2023, the average family home is just over $400,000. So you have to ask yourself, why is that? Is it because things have just gotten more expensive? No, it's actually because the dollar has lost 99% of its value since 1930, right? When people talk about the collapse of the dollar or inflation, this is what it means. Now, let's take a look at gold. So in 1930, if you wanted to purchase your home in gold, it would take approximately 200 gold coins. So 200 gold coins would purchase the average family home in 1930, about $4,000. Now, if you, instead of buying a home with that gold or cash, you set those aside, if you set aside $4,000 in cash in 1930, it would be worth $4,000 today. What can you buy with $4,000? Can you buy a family home? No, you can't even buy a crappy used car. But if you set aside $4,000 worth of gold coins in 1930, which is 200 gold coins, 1 ounce coins, that would be worth approximately $400,000 today. And this is the key lesson about precious metals. It's not about getting rich. It's about putting your money into an asset that protects you against inflation and against the destruction of the currency, which is what happens to all fiat currencies, especially now we're in the end days of the dollar. And so that's why it's important, maybe not all of your money, but a portion of your money, a portion of what you have, I highly recommend putting it into precious metals of gold and silver, because what it's doing is it's protecting you. This is an asset that has stood the test of time, not just stood the test of time since the 1930s. We're talking about the rise and fall of civilizations. Gold was used to buy houses back in ancient Rome. It's still around. It's an asset that will forever have its value. So folks, if you want to do this and you need someone that you can trust, there's no person I can recommend more than Dr. Kirk Elliott. He's a very good friend of mine. He's a strong Christian patriot, and he's out to really help people to protect their savings and what you've worked for against the destruction of the dollar, not to mention also protecting it against the dangers of central bank digital currencies. So to learn more about this, go to goldwithseth.com or call 720-605-3900. Again, that's goldwithseth.com or 720-605-3900. Both those places will allow you to set up a quick appointment where you can talk to a wealth advisor that will help get you started on this path. Again, goldwithseth.com, 720-605-3900.
And so with the cell naturally being negative on the inside and positive on the outside, when you let more chloride come in, it reinforces or hyperpolarizes that negative potential or voltage between inside and outside, and it prevents the cell from getting activated. Now, it can still get activated just fine when the right receptor opens the right channels, but it won't get inappropriately activated. Now, we're getting a little in the realm of hypothesis here, but when the cell is in its not in, when it's just activated to its clean up the mess mode, phagocytosis, the M1 from macrophage, and it's out there gobbling up these, dead cells and particles and debris. Those membranes are moving around a lot. And there are probably now, you've got a situation where there's a lot more leakage of ions going on. And so it's more important to actually maintain that electrical balance by having enough glycine around. So glycine becomes more critical when you have a lot of macrophages which are activated to at least do something, not inflammation, uh, but cleaning up the mess so that healing can take place. And so it's acting. So this is the amount. So everything has to be in balance. We all know that the salts, sodium, potassium, and calcium, and all of that, you can do a blood test, and they got to be in a very tight range of concentration in a healthy body. Otherwise, things can go downhill very quickly. Well, one of the really electrolytes that that is important in this context is glycine. And that's another use of language. Because glycine is an amino acid and it has carbon in it, it is called organic. So it's called organic, although it's not really organic. It's called non-essential, even though it's really essential for certain things, not as a protein building block, but for these other functions. So the way things get named send us on, send us in the wrong direction sometimes. So it's all very. It all has to do with language. I mean, after all, God created the universe, right? This is true. So we can see when we study things and study our own sciences, our own body of knowledge of how the body works, how science works, how chemistry works. Every time we name things, we run the risk of not having exactly the right name. Mark Twain said something like having the difference between having the right word in the context of some writing and not the right word is like almost the right word is not quite going to work. And that's the way it is with understanding any of the electrophysiology and chemistry and all these other fancy things. It boils down, as I said, with science, it all boils down to something very, very simple. And it turns out to be very simple. And once you discover it, you realize that all the evidence points to it. And you can see all these diseases, even ones that they don't realize are chronic inflammation, or that it's taken them a while to realize it, are all due to chronic inflammation because they are processes that involve cell death. Here's another one for you: brain development. The way the brain develops as an organ, we've all seen a brain. It has all those very deep folds and convolutions in the brain. Well, the way it forms is first you have a solid mass, and then the cells that aren't needed in between parts that are needed are cut out, like making paper dolls. So that's why, for example, when they do amniocentesis, where they do genetic testing on the unborn, they can do that because once they get inside that amniotic sac where the baby is gestating, there are all kinds of floating cells that have been just cut off because they're not needed. There's the cells that were in between the fingers and toes, and also in between the lobes of the brain. And the brain keeps developing till you're like 25. Well, what's another disease that's off the charts these days? It's more than 1% incidence of autism spectrum disorder, isn't it? Well, because there's inflammation going on in the brain. And there are a number of papers that have been out showing, yes, if you look at the brains of people who are on the autism spectrum, there's inflammation in the brain. Why do we have chronic traumatic brain injury? Why is that such a problem, even with the most sophisticated football helmets and shock absorbing elements that we can, that we can devise? Why are there, concussion protocols and all of that? Why does that happen, leading to traumatic brain injury? Again, with injury like that, you get chronic inflammation in the brain. For example, I fell and hit my head against a very hard edge of a hardwood table about 5 years ago, and it was like like in the old Western movies, you clock the bank guard on the head, it's knocked out, and I wake up on the floor, looking up, confused and dazed, and so on. And they said, "Oh, I had a severe concussion," and to get followed up, and I said, "I don't," because I was taking glycine every day, as I have been now for 15 years. And actually, by the time I was in the ER for 2 hours, the pain went away. Didn't even have a headache anymore. And I was fine, and I had no inflammation from it, and I knew I wouldn't and, you know, they can give me all the advice they want. I know why the follow-up from a traumatic head injury causes these problems. It's all because of inflammation, and it's all because of glycine deficiency. So there's so many things you can list now, from the beginning of life, like with autism, to Alzheimer's disease, later in life. This is, of course, by the time you actually get a measurable memory deficits, often the process is, there's brain tissue that's been lost, which you can't necessarily get back. But so we have diseases from the beginning of life, in utero, all the way, to the end, with arthritis and diabetes and so on thrown in. Then you have a very, very broad spectrum of conditions, and this has been written up. Most of the work that was shown that showed how glycine works on a cellular level was done by a very good group of scientists at UNC, University of North Carolina, in the 1990s. The head of the group was a man named Ron Thurman. And Thurman was actually a toxicologist, and unfortunately, he died in 2001. And the group kind of got scattered to the four winds, and they never quite got there in terms of understanding the role of glycine as something essential. They said it's amazing that glycine is good for cancer, good for sepsis, good for this injury and that, and it's amazing how glycine can be useful for so many conditions. So that's sort of, as you alluded to before, thinking of it as some sort of a drug that it can help this condition. So I sell a glycine product now, but and this is, so many of my customers say they'll try it and they'll say, "Oh yes, I had these pain in my hip that's been bothering me for years, and now it's gone away." And they'll take the Sweetamine, glycine supplement, for a few years or a few months, and it'll go away, and then they'll stop. So I see a lot of customers that have just bought some of the product, and they haven't bought it in 3 years. They bought it 3 years ago. They purchased it for some matter of months, and then they just stopped. And now they're purchasing it again. And the thing is, glycine's not a drug. It's food. It's food. It's something that we need about 10 grams a day of. And we usually get about 2 or 3 grams a day in the diet. So like my product gives you another 8 grams. And so that gives you basically what I consider an RDA, or, recommended daily allowance, what I would think, for glycine. It's not just me. There is another group in the Canary Islands in Spain who's talked about glycine being conditionally essential, how much the body actually needs in order to be healthy. So I'm not completely alone. But it's one of those things where it's kind of known but not known. I mean, there is enough in the literature to really prove all of this, but it's not known. For example, I said before that vegans have more glycine in their blood than meat eaters do, which is something that I came to the conclusion of that about 10 years ago. But then it had never been, quote, proven. And then there was a paper that came out about 5 years ago from Oxford, right? Very prestigious place, very prestigious study, where they looked at the amino acid content in 100 vegans and 100 vegetarians and 100 fish eaters and 100 meat eaters, omnivores, people who eat everything. And they were interested in amino acids. They wanted to see if you ate, what was the correlation between the amino acid content of the diet and the free amino acid content of the blood plasma. And what I knew was that if you're going to eat more meat, you're actually going to deplete glycine, as I said before. They found that. They said everything seems, if you eat more of this, you have more of that in your blood, except for glycine, because the vegans eat less of it than anybody else, than the meat eaters do, but the meat eaters have less of it in their blood. And the sad thing is they couldn't explain it. They didn't know why. Of course, if their hypothesis had fit, that those who eat more of every amino acid have more of that amino acid in their blood, my hypothesis would have been basically disproven. But instead, they proved it, but they had no idea. They didn't know why, because this thinking is very simplistic. And science, as I said before, um, has largely decayed, shall we say, due to the advances in technology. The more technology has advanced, the more real science has decayed. So, precisely because we can get so much data so easily. So now there are new fields called metabolomics and genomics and all kinds of omics or omics. My favorite omics are stand-up comics. I like those kinds of things. But the others, I'm not so sure about. Actually, they're great tools, but they're not really sciences in themselves. But now, because you can take a drop of blood and measure about 300 or 400 different substances in it, whereas you needed a whole test tube of blood 30 years ago when I was a junior scientist. And in those days, talking about 1970s and 80s, you know, you could you would have to have a very good idea, a very good hypothesis of what you think might be a good indicator of what you were looking for as a marker for disease or something. Or nobody was going to give you any money for it, to just look for everything. Now, because we have the technology to look at everything, we can take that drop of blood, basically throw it up against the wall, and let the computers sort out the difference between people with a disease versus without a disease, scientifically setting up a control and experimental group. And the computer will tell us what's significantly different and what isn't. And then we can spend half the paper speculating as to what that might be. Now, that these days is called data-based science. You collect all the data you can, and then you look at it and say, now, what does that mean? In the old days, and when I was a junior scientist, we used to call that fishing expedition. It's basically trawling. You drag your net out and you collect everything there is. And then you try to figure out what it means, instead of saying, well, we've noticed that, there's a tendency for someone with this disease to have more of that stuff in their blood, or to have this symptom or that symptom. Let's look at these one or two or three things and see if there's something in the blood that will give us a clue, that will predict the outcome of the disease or the onset of the disease, that sort of thing. And that's a hypothesis. So they call that hypothesis-based science. In the old days, we used to call that science, because that's the only way you do it. So with science, you have to have a hypothesis, something that you're looking for, instead of the kind I was telling you about with that group at Oxford saying, let's see if the amino acids that people eat are reflected exactly as the amino acids in the blood. With sort of a completely innocent approach, as if we didn't know anything. And instead of saying, what do we know about the blood? What do we know about amino acids? What is it that we might find different? What's our hypothesis? What are we looking for? Now we're not looking for anything except, well, let's just see what's there. Let's just collect all the data. And somehow it's, in a way, it's like AI, which I mentioned before. It's where you just throw in massive amounts of data, but you still have these, all the biases are built in your thinking, and you can't have anything that's really neutral. So, but it shouldn't be neutral. It should be structured along real knowledge, the lines of real knowledge. What do we know about this system? Maybe we'll be surprised. Well, what does that mean? That threw us.
Well, I think the problems also is that when you're trolling all this data, you
Yeah.
can find whatever you're being paid to find. And so, which I think is a lot of what
right.
science has become. And also you mentioned before that, that there's not a lot of mainstream, not a lot of big studies on this. And to me, it makes sense why it would be covered up and kind of shoved to the side, because
Right.
it's something that, if you look at the drug industry, I mean, it undermines a lot of the big drugs that are very profitable, these drug companies.
Yes.
To
I
say
see.
that there's this simple solution, actually, that means you won't need this huge shelf of pharmaceuticals every month.
For me, it's actually heartbreaking. I mean, I see most of the ads, at least half or more of the ads I see for different these biologic drugs. They are there to target some particular aspect of inflammation, which means what? It means it targets the normal response so that it can't happen. That's why the disclaimer at the end of all these ads, psoriatic arthritis, eczema, and Crohn's disease, and everything else, is that don't take it if you've been exposed to some infection or you've been to a country where there's a certain infection going on. It means if you're exposed to that kind of infection, that drug that you're taking has now inactivated that function of the immune system, the inflammation, and so you're more prone to these things. So it's making you sick. Can you imagine? You start putting your kid's almost 6 months. So wait a few months, right now you can not too young to start on a lifetime of dangerous, very strong, very expensive drugs. So you're right. I mean, now the economic pressures are uh, really kind of irresistible. I guess in terms of
Exactly.
the whole medical community, nobody wants to buck the trend.
And so what I take away from this is, well, for me in general, I always try to look at my food as my medicine, right? So we do a lot of bone broths. I just pulled off another 3 or 4 day bone broth with big, cow joints and all kinds of
Yeah.
stuff, which is really good. But a lot of people don't do bone broth, so and a lot of people are just
Right.
eating the meat, which has the opposite effect of it doesn't just say doesn't just give them, no glycine, it actually eats away at the glycine that they have to balance
Yes.
things out, and so,
Right.
for me, lesson 1 is eat bone broths, right? Eat or drink bone broths, make it part of your daily regimen, but again, a lot of people don't. So you mentioned Sweetamine. So you mentioned, you developed basically what
Right.
I understand to be one of the most simple ways just to get more glycine into your system. So walk us through what Sweetamine is.
Okay. So Sweetamine, which is my glycine supplement, is formulated to be used as a sweetener because it's not practical to do it as capsules or pills because you need grams a day, not milligrams or micrograms a day. And so, 5 grams is like a teaspoon. So 8 grams a day is pretty much really what people need, generally speaking. And so, since it has a natural sweet taste and a bad aftertaste, that with a couple of other natural ingredients in it basically gives you a day's how much glycine you need every day to be really healthy, to have your immune system really healthy in terms of not having inappropriate inflammation. And that amount, that 8 grams, is about what you find in a quart of bone broth, which is a lot of bone broth.
That's
Now,
a
I
lot.
know I know people who eat bone broth at that kind of rate, and they say, no, it doesn't happen to me when I get a sunburn. It goes away. No, when I get a blunt injury, it doesn't get. So, this is, and there are people who think there's all kinds of different things in the bone broth, and there are other nutrients there, sure, but there's nothing that critical other than glycine. It's the glycine that makes the difference. Now, there are always going to be, charlatans out there saying, "Oh, you got to have type 2E collagen and not type 3C collagen," and they'll have this very expensive. No, any collagen is going to have about the same amount of glycine, so it's going to. And collagen, when it's in the food form, is usually called gelatin because it's been basically extracted and heated. But it's the same thing. So gelatin, collagen, any of that will give you a lot of glycine. It's a funny ad I've seen. There's an ad with two football players on the bench where they have voiced over the voice of little children. Oh, this is so good. And they're advertising gummy bears, Harico Gold Bears. Oh, these are so good. I like these a lot, to football players. It's a very funny ad put out by Harico Gold Bears. And I'm wondering if anybody knows that will actually help them to heal from injuries because Harico Gold Bears have a lot of gelatin. You have a packet of Harico Gold Bears, you got uh, about half a daily packet of Sweden worth of glycine. So I wouldn't be surprised if Harico Gold Bears are a big hit among football players and people like that who are engaged in that kind of a violent sport. Um, maybe, and I just wish that the world would know this. That's very simple connection. No, it's not a drug, but something that's just good for so many different conditions. This is an essential part of nutrition that almost everybody is missing. And when people are not missing it, when everybody gets it one way or another, whether they take Sweetamine every day or they take bone broth every day or they eat enough gummy bears, all of that, in combination, all these chronic diseases will go away. People will live to be 100 and just die of old age again, instead of hobbling through their 40s, 50s, and 60s with more and more and more and more medications and conditions and artificial joints and all the expense. I mean, you see how our society keeps getting mired deeper and deeper into indebtedness due to healthcare costs because we're not really caring for health. We're really just paying for more sophisticated band-aids, and they don't really fix the problem. But it's just a matter of recognizing the problem, and it's just so simple. For me, it tends to be kind of a heartbreaking thing. At least by starting a company and selling a product, I can make it available. And I make it available. It's completely risk free. If you don't like it, just tell me you don't like it. You get your money back. You don't have to send an empty package or anything like that. And just try it. And if you don't like it, as I said, if you don't like it, it's risk free. It's totally harmless. Um, and if for some reason, some people say, well, it's too sweet. I don't like sweeteners. I can't stand it. I'll say, well, for that matter, you should have bone broth or just buy gelatin, which is basically tasteless. I don't sell it, but other people sell gelatin. Get your glycine one way or another. I formulated it in a nice, simple, easy way, right? I don't even have a box. And that's pretty much all it is. And it's simple, inexpensive. It's food, as I say, and that's so that's my vehicle for getting knowledge out. I was a professor and a basic scientist for many years. I was never a businessman, and it just occurred to me as a way that I could at least make it available while the academics slug it out over the course of decades to decide what's true and what isn't in science. Because science, they say, they often talk about a scientific consensus. And that's an oxymoron because consensus is a political construct. It's not a scientific construct.
That's a good point.
And that's what consensus is. And science usually consensus is usually whatever the prevailing dogma is. And scientists, just like anybody else, are herd animals. And they go along to get along and everything like that until someone comes along, some little kid comes around, points out that the emperor has no clothes, and then you have a whole catharsis. But it often typically takes decades for the mold to be broken just because of the nature, the bureaucratic nature of society and medical and scientific organizations. And it's just the way it happens. So.
It is. It is. Well, Joel, we'll put a link to the website in the URL. It's mysweetamine.com/Seth. They get a
Right.
special discount with that. We'll put that in the description, or for the audio listeners, again, it's just
Right.
Sweetamine, which is SWEETI, or sorry, Sweetamine, SWEETAMINE. So
Right.
mysweetamine.com/Seth. And thank you for this. And this is what, I interview a lot of different experts and a lot of people have developed products for things. But to me, the real gold is the knowledge it took to come to this place where there's this product that now exists. And people can walk away from this and say, wow, now I'm going to drink my bone broth every day. Or they can go eat a pound of gummy bears every day. I don't recommend that. Or they say, or I'll get, a packet of Sweetamine every day, throw it in the morning coffee, throw it in the morning tea, whatever it is, and get it that way. So, Joel, I really appreciate the time you've given us today. I thank you for what you're doing, and I'll have to have you come back again some later time, and I'll look forward to dumping some of that in my coffee in the mornings as well. So
Okay. Well, I hope you like the taste of it. But if you don't, you have the bone broth will protect you anyway. One
or
way
you
or
could put
another,
it
you got
in
to
the
get your
bone
glycine.
broth, and you'll have sweet bone broth with double
Right.
the amount of
Okay.
glycine.
Right. Okay. Well, you got to get your glycine one way or the other. Thanks very much.
Yeah,
I
thank you
appreciate
so much. Take care. Folks, perhaps you'd agree with me when I say that over the past 5 years, the mainstream healthcare system's credibility has plummeted. Alternative healthcare systems that aren't beholden to medical consensus or big pharma are on the rise. Sweetamine is time tested and proven to boost your life with better health. It's one of the leading products that helps with inflammation and daily aches and pains. Just because you get older, it doesn't mean that you have to feel old. And folks, did you know that most of the diseases that make people sick and die these days are rooted in chronic inflammation, oftentimes due to glycine deficiency? So, sweetamine is composed mainly of the amino acid glycine, the nutrient that the immune system uses to regulate inflammation. So, with once daily sweetamine, most people feel the reduction in pain after just a few days. So, I challenge you to the 12-day sweetamine challenge to fight inflammation and take control of your health today. So, folks, buy sweetamine online at sweetamine.com or call 855 GET SWEET. That's 855 438 7933, and make sure you use promo code SETH, SETH, to get a nice discount on your purchase.